In July, my family and I will move into our new 125-year-old home, just a few doors up the street from the David Alonzo and Elizabeth Purviance house, and within easy walking distance of St. Felix Friary, where I expect to go frequently to pay my respects to the humble friar whom my grandmother had met, and whose beatification and eventual canonization she prayed for every day of her life, never realizing the role that Father Solanus would one day play in mine. There are no political solutions to cultural problems, but we need to take that a step further. We need to realize that there are no cultural solutions to cultural problems either. Cultural problems require a religious solution. Walking in the way of faith, asking God for forgiveness and begging Him for His grace, doing the right thing without thought for tomorrow or despair for today, because while we may never know in this life the chain of events that the most humble of our actions may set in motion, God knows. We don't have to fix everything. We cannot fix everything. All we can do, all we are called to do, is to love God and to love our neighbor, wherever that may take us. I will close with 4 short quotations, the first 3 from Father Solanus Casey and the last from St. Jose Maria Escrivá, because I think that, taken together, they sum up perfectly the principles that should guide us as we begin the countermarch through the institutions. The restoration of culture by enshrining Christ first in our hearts. From Father Solanus: we are continually immersed in God's merciful grace like the air that permeates us. We must be faithful to the present moment, or we will frustrate the plan of God for our lives. Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger people. Do not pray for tasks equal to your powers. Pray for powers equal to your tasks. And from St. Jose Maria Escrivá: the task for a Christian is to drown evil in an abundance of good. It is not a question of negative campaigns or being anti-anything. On the contrary, we should live positively, full of optimism, with youthfulness, joy, and peace. We should be understanding with everybody, with the followers of Christ, and with those who abandon Him or do not know Him at all. But understanding does not mean drawing back or remaining indifferent, but being active. Thank you.
I would like to ask one.
Sure.
I've often thought that the Second World War was sort of the touchstone of people going from their towns, leaving their families, because the young men that went from many small towns never went back, but they saw the world, a world that they didn't even know about, often married a girl from another area, and that was the beginning of the breaking apart of the families. But it seems it's a sad beginning because of the victory we had in the war, that it was the beginning of the end of the family life in that era.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's certainly true. The war did have that first effect. The aftermath of the war, the explosion of manufacturing in this country, the rise in standard of living, had an effect that actually turned out to be even greater than the effect of the war. My old colleague Alan Carlson has written quite a bit about this. That period from the very late 40s up to the early 60s is the period when in some ways you could say people now have a chance to focus their, to give their family things that they couldn't before, and oftentimes instead it resulted in families scattering. Not necessarily with the idea that they wanted to get away from each other, but that is in fact what ends up happening. That you get young people going off, never returning to the towns except maybe Thanksgiving and Christmas. And a generation of people of older people who thought that this was actually for the best. And that led to a lot of social ills down the road that we're still dealing with today. What's fascinating today is that I look at people in their early to mid-20s, and they're really a mixed bag. We all know all the names people call them, millennials, snowflakes, all this sort of thing. There are a lot of problems that people think characterize this generation, but there are also a lot of people in their mid-20s who are getting married earlier than the past two generations. They are having children earlier than the past two generations. Okay. They are moving back to their hometowns, whether it's the hometown where their parents were, or maybe actually going back a generation or two before that. They're looking for stability that oftentimes that they didn't experience in their lives. Their parents are more likely to have been divorced. They are, it's still early days, but they seem to be sticking it out and trying to remain married. They are sacrificing upward mobility in order to have stability in their lives. If you go out to Rockford, Illinois, Rockford, 20 years ago when we came there, the downtown was in horrible shape. The downtown of Rockford is now in the best shape it's ever been in, probably. And, since the days of the old department stores, etc. But it is largely people coming back, settling down, young people starting businesses, and saying, we value this. We value being able actually to live above the store. All of the housing in Rockford's downtown is full right now, which is just amazing. You think about that, all these little stores, restaurants, etc., and they've had these vacant apartments sitting above them for decades. Every last one of them is full, many of them with young families with children. There are still problems. I mean, these young people are moving in the right direction, but there's a loss of faith in this generation, largely because there was a loss of faith in their parents' generation. But there are positive signs, and one of the things that we need to think about when we start talking about taking back the institutions of culture is we need to encourage the positive signs, even if everything isn't entirely positive. Even if, any step in the right direction is a step in the right direction. And so encouraging young families who are starting businesses by shopping at those businesses. This seems like such a little bitty thing, and yet it may bear incredible fruit down the line.
Any other questions that you'd like to ask?
Do you think there's any, a lot of these, are we putting up a facade when it comes to these hopes of returning to this cultural phenomenon when so many of our ancestors basically had left Europe, right? Not even able to go back for Christmas or New
Right.
Year's, right? I mean, they left, and once left, they were gone.
Well, not once left they were gone. Many, one of the stories that's not widely known is, for instance, how many Italians returned to Italy. In fact, there was a lot of movement back. Almost in the main period of Italian immigration, there were almost as many Italians going back to Italy as there were coming over. Because they would come over, they would make some money, they would come back and to their hometown, and they could establish a very nice life for the families. This, by the way, used to be the dynamic among migrant workers in the United States in my lifetime. You know, I grew up on the west coast of Michigan, and the Mexican migrant workers who were coming in under the old migrant worker program would come in at the beginning of the mid-spring, work their way up through the west side of Michigan, harvesting various crops, and then back down. And at in September, October, they would head back to Mexico, where they had stable family lives, they had homes, et cetera, et cetera. The great tragedy of the Reagan era amnesty is that it destroyed that program. You know, this the Mexican immigration problem actually becomes a problem because of the amnesty destroying this program.
They're not going back.
They're not going
Still
back.
trying to stay.
Yeah, and the program itself had ways of keeping track of migrant workers, and it worked to the benefit of everyone, because in order to come in as a migrant worker, there had to be a need for you. So you weren't taking jobs away from Americans in West Michigan, for instance, but you were coming in and filling jobs that actually weren't being filled.
Okay, any other questions? Yes?
I think you mentioned, you said cultural problems require religious solutions. Couldn't agree more. How do you start? Where do you begin on that?
Well, again, you know, you begin first with yourself, first with yourself, then with your parish. You build up and outward from there. The trouble is that we've become so accustomed to thinking in terms of every big problem has to have a big solution. James Burnham, who wrote The Suicide of the West, James Burnham used to say that if there is no solution, there is no problem. Yeah. And in a way, we're at that point with some of the biggest cultural problems. When we look at them from a national level or a societal level, you know, there really is no solution to the question of abortion considered at that level of 1.3 million children meeting the deaths every year. So it's, in that sense, it's not a problem that can be addressed. We have to look at it where we can address it, and to work from the ground up. All of the changes in the right direction for the pro-life movement over the last 20 years, since Casey, all of the changes in the right direction have come at the state and local levels. They've come through pregnancy care centers. They have come through zoning changes at local levels that have made it hard or impossible for Planned Parenthood to come in or stay in. They have made it. They've come at the state level with health restrictions, health legislation that actually is beginning to chip away at the special privileges that abortuaries have. There are now somewhere in the range of 3 pregnancy care centers in the United States for every 1 abortuary. This is a very positive change. It has made a difference. It is making a difference, not only in saving the lives of the babies, but in the lives of the mothers, fathers, the broader community. When I first started working with the Pregnancy Care Center of Rockford, though, I actually got attacked by people who didn't know me, who considered themselves strong pro-life types, because they said, you're wasting your time on that. What we need is a national solution. You don't spend your time and efforts on that. Don't give money to these organizations. The first guy who said this to me, I thought, this guy's a kook. How can he not see? And then, sadly, I found a lot of other people who said the same thing, because they're so caught up in the idea that the only thing that matters is a big solution to a big problem. Start with the problems that you can attack. You know, if you don't reshingle a house by dropping a brand new roof on it, you put one shingle on at a time.
But there's one there, yeah.
I mean, pregnancy centers are absolutely wonderful. But politically speaking, what about states like California that would force them to mention abortion?
Well, or states like Illinois.
Illinois.
You know, that's my pregnancy care center, the Pregnancy Care Center of Rockford. We are fighting the law that was signed by Governor Rauner. We're the chief plaintiff on that, and the law, at least here, isn't quite as bad as California. California actually does have some kind of penalty. Yes, sorry, for not mentioning it. Here, it's vague. There's probably not a problem if you don't mention it. But thankfully nobody has to right now, because we have an injunction against the law, and we're pretty certain it's going to fall.
Could you explain that law that you're talking about?
It basically says that if you provide any kind of medical service at a pregnancy care center, which of course means ultrasounds, if you provide any kind of medical service, or you have any
Or even pregnancy tests, maybe not.
no, pregnancy tests don't count for that, but ultrasounds, yes. And if you have any medical staff on medical personnel on staff, which you have to, if you're doing ultrasounds, you have to have a nurse practitioner at least on staff for that. Then you have to refer clients to abortionists if they request it. And again, the law is written in this very strange, unclear manner. There are probably ways around it. It's better just for it to go. But Governor Rauner, who of course had said, look, you don't need to worry. He told pro-lifers, you don't need to worry. I may not be on your side, but I'm not going to change anything. When this law came through, he signed it.
Well, and it also requires them to tell the benefits of abortion to the clients.
Yeah.
The benefits of abortion.
Yeah. And that part actually is a little bit easier to get around, because most pregnancy care centers, in fact, do walk you through what an abortion entails, and they address the quote perceived benefits. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But it's a bad situation. So what do you do in those cases? Well, you do fight. You try to keep those places open, and you look for new opportunities. You know, there are pregnancy care centers in California that are fighting those laws, and with any luck, they will succeed as we hope to succeed here in Illinois.
I wanted to ask you about, it seems to me that a big corrupting influence for young people, even from families that are intact and okay and Catholic and all that, the corrupting influences when they go away to college.
Yes.
The secular colleges, which is an indoctrination course for 4 years, and they come back, sort of, many of them rejecting everything that they went away from their family with. So,
Right.
I don't know, how do you overcome something like that? Not allow them to go to school or college or
Well,
something, you know?
that's hard, and there are more and more homeschooling families. We homeschooled up until this point, and we know homeschooling families where the children aren't going off to college for that very reason. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, because those who aren't going off to college are looking at vocational programs, they're looking at small businesses, they're trying to figure out other ways to yeah, that is a very good way of putting it. And in fact, many of the problems that we see at the college level are only there because of the fact that these colleges have way too much money, and because of that, they can focus on things that aren't central to the task of education.
Gender studies.
And because of that, you know, if you saw fewer and fewer people going to college, colleges would now have to start strengthening their academic programs, and they would have to raise the question of whether certain programs are worth keeping around. But it is a tough decision. You know, there are still good schools out there. You know, Jacob and now his brother will be out at Loras, and Loras is a good, solid Catholic school. There are a lot of Catholic schools that aren't quite as solid either, but in many cases they have the same problem. You know, they're flush with cash, and when people get flush with cash, they do odd things sometimes.
But you know, in the Newman Guide that lists the Catholic colleges, it's hard in many ways to sell those colleges to your children because they're so small.
They're small, or they're isolated.
Even though they're excellent, they're going to keep the faith, and the people that have come out of them are on fire with their faith and want to change the world. But it's hard to sell them because there's just a few hundred people in
Yes.
them.
Yeah, that's true, and that's, you know, one of the reasons that I think that Loras is a really good example of a college that's about the right size and sort of the right makeup. Is, you know, it is just large enough. It's what, 1,600 students, somewhere in there, I think, and you know, that seems small to an 18-year-old, to a lot of 18-year-olds, but when you realize that, you know, 1,600 students is enough that you won't know everybody, and that is the kind of thing to get through to kids. You know, they think they want to go out into the wider world, and you need to you can sit down with them and you can say, look, how many friends do you have? How many people do you think you see in an average year? You know, how many different places do you go to in your own town, whatever the size might be? And people, even 18-year-olds, are capable of realizing, once you start putting it this way, that in fact their world is much smaller than they think it is. And that's a good thing. That's, you know, most of our life, our world is much smaller than we think it is. And if it weren't, we'd all go crazy.
Are there any other questions that you'd like to ask, Kevin?
Quick response to Mary Ann's question, and also picking up on your theme. I would also, and I don't know if anyone in this room is probably of the age that it still matters directly, but the other way to inoculate your kids and send them anywhere you want is to take responsibility within the family,
Yeah.
to really be strong, not just on the, you know, the sort of the practices and procedures, but the actual arguments about the faith. My kids, many of them went to St. Ignatius High School, which I mention only because they at least were not counter what the kids were getting at home. And if you, I'm not saying it's going to happen all the time, but again, to your point, you've got to start at the ground. I also just became aware that the Archdiocese of Chicago is rolling out a new program for what I used to call CCD, which is actually requiring the parents to take instruction and then instruct their kids. Now, I don't know if this is going to work, but if you read, we posted recently remarks that Bishop Schneider recently made about the importance of the family to Catholic education. I recommend it to all of you. So I don't know if they're going to pull it off, because I went to a meeting in my parish, and you know, there are only like 6 or 7 parents there, and half of them didn't sound like they were getting it.
Yeah.
But that is a way to send your kids to any college, because once they're out of high school, you've either made it or not, you know. And if you haven't made it, it doesn't matter where you send them.
Yeah,
Okay.
that I think is true. You know, I went to Michigan State, met my wife at Michigan State, and we were both in the honors program there. And the honors program at Michigan State, even today, gives you the opportunity to shape your education in a way that many college students don't have. And so what it meant for us was we could find good professors,
Right.
and we could take all of our courses with them. So there are even options, even in, as Russell Kirk used to call it, Behemoth U. There are options that can help shelter your child somewhat. You can't shelter them
No.
entirely.
No.
Juice?
St. Jude's Church in New Lenox has that program you're talking
Okay.
about, where the parents have to study and then teach the children.
Yes.
It's supposed to be wildly successful.
Oh, good.
I hope that's the case.
I'm glad to hear that. You know, I think that there's a balance to be struck that we put a lot of emphasis on education when it comes to the faith, especially for preparation for baptism, First Communion, confirmation, and sometimes we can start losing a sense of the fact that these are sacraments that in fact have power even if our own understanding is deficient, and especially when it comes to confirmation. You know, there are so many kids who've never been confirmed because they just don't want to go through the educational aspect, and they really should be confirmed.
And they're in
But-
charge of their parents.
Right. Yeah, and but the problem does go back again generations. That there are a lot of parents actually, even who still had a decent catechetical education themselves, but they've forgotten it all. You know, in my 10 years working with About.com as the Catholicism expert, the thing that struck me the most in, say, the first 18 months that I was doing this is I was kind of writing from, okay, here are all the things I can take for granted. You know, the first couple of years there, I needed to basically write for Catholics, and then after that I could kind of branch out to people who are interested in Catholicism, bring them in. So I figured, okay, I can take for granted kind of all the stuff that I learned up through confirmation, right?
No.
No, in fact, you know, I would get emails from people who were good and devout, and they were going to church every Sunday, and they had a level of understanding of the faith, intellectual understanding of the faith, that was back at the preparation for First Communion level. We do not do a good job in the Catholic Church in this country in continuing education for adults, or continuing past the level of confirmation. We do so very little to try to encourage people to read good Catholic publications, to read Catholic books. I mean, every parish ought to have a library, a lending library that parishioners could use, and that the priest is standing up there every Sunday saying, by the way, here's the latest books we've got in. Don't everybody run over there right now and get them, you know. But very few churches actually have that sort of thing. Very few churches require their parishioners to pay for even subscription to the diocesan newspaper. I mean, anything, just getting these things into your house. You know, again, it's one of those things where you can't
Maybe not,
underestimate.
maybe not the
Well,
diocesan.
okay. You can't underestimate the importance of just the opportunities. You know, one of the big problems with online only stuff versus print publications is that, you know, when it comes to anything that's online only, you've got to go out and you've got to find it. You know, it may be available on every device that you have, but you've got to go find it. When a newspaper is delivered to your house and it's sitting there on your coffee table, your kids might stumble across it and they might pick it up. And those little things make a big, big difference.
I was going to suggest that for a parish that has a library and encourages the parents to read it, a good thing to promote that type of thing would be like a book club for mothers, so that they can read the book and discuss it. Our kids, when they took their first babies to be baptized and they went through the baptism program at the parish, they were shocked that nobody else in the class knew that there were 7 sacraments, knew anything about the faith. They had not. The parents, even though they were bringing their children to be baptized, really essentially knew almost nothing about the faith.
Yeah, a lot of parish RCIA programs are run by people who've gone through parish RCIA programs, and so you end up with sort of the telephone game effect. that after a generation or two, you end up with a real limited understanding of what people coming into the church should understand.
Any other questions? Yes?
This idea of education, it seems like I heard someplace that the priests are supposed to always preach their homily on the gospel and the epistle. And so I think, if that's what they're supposed to be preaching on the homily, you know, their homily on, when can they instruct? Because so often the only time they can instruct is at Mass.